see it because he is perfection. He can see it all. That's why I told you, he's infinite. Yes, that means there is no end to him. His perfection knows no beginning and no end. He is perfection. Do you understand that? That's why he can see even the things that are invisible. Because he is perfection and he exists in a place that's higher than everything else. It's like God is in an airplane or a helicopter looking down on everything. And by everything, I'm not talking about just the earth. I'm talking about the second heaven as well. And everything in between that and third heaven. He sees it all. The third heaven is where he reigns supreme. At the pinnacle of everything. The pinnacle means the tip-top point. Hey, welcome to By Faith and Grace Alone's Saturday morning Bible study. As a lot of you obviously know, we were scheduled to start at 9, and boy, oh boy, did we. But there were some technical difficulties that apparently cut the audio off from the video. So we decided to go ahead and reinitiate the stream, being able to actually give you guys the actual study today as it is, or it has been promised. So having said that, without further ado, let's get into it. Grab a cup of joe, grab a cup of tea, grab yourself a bowl of cereal or a sandwich, considering that it is basically beautiful, beautiful brunch time. But let's get into the beautiful, beautiful book of Proverbs. For those of you that do not know, we did actually have an actual book of Proverbs, or what is the book of Proverbs video that was put out there for all of those that wanted to know what the book of Proverbs was in detail. It's on the channel. Other than that, though, let's move forward. We're gonna try to definitely run through this as best as we can, as thoroughly as we can, while still being time conscious, considering the fact that we did start a little late. So, having said that, let's move over to chapter 1, verse 1. We're going to do our absolute best to read through the entire thing one time, then we're going to go through the ICB, and after that, we are going to go more or less section by section, trying to get the actual the gist of what these beautiful proverbs are saying. So without further ado, let's read them through. The book of Proverbs, chapter 1, verse 1. The Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel, to know wisdom and instruction, to perceive the words of understanding, to receive the instruction of wisdom, justice, judgment, equity, to give prudence to the simple, to the young man knowledge and discretion. A wise man will hear and increase learning, and a man of understanding will attain wise counsel. To understand a proverb and an enigma, the words of the wise and the riddles. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. Section break. It says, shun evil counsel. My son, hear the instruction of your father, and do not forsake the law of your mother, for they will be a graceful ornament on your head and a chain around your neck. My son, if sinners entice you, do not consent. If they say, come with us, let us lie in wait to shed blood. Let us lurk secretly for the innocent without cause. Let us swallow them alive like the Sheol, and whole like those who go down to the pit. We shall find all kinds of precious possessions, and we shall fill our house with spoil. Cast in your lot among us. Let us all have one purse. My son, do not walk in the way with them. Keep your foot from their path. For their feet run to evil, and they make haste to shed blood. Surely in vain the net is spread in the sight of any bird, but they lie in wait for their own blood. They lurk secretly for their own lives. So are the ways of everyone who is greedy for gain. It takes away the life of the owner. Break. It says to call for wisdom. Section break. It says, wisdom calls aloud outside. She raises her voice in the open square. She cries out in chief concourses. At the openings of the gate in the city, she speaks her words. How long, you simple ones, will you love simplicity? For scorners delight in their scorning, and fools hate knowledge. Turn at my rebuke. Surely I will pour out my spirit on you. I will make my words known to you, because I have called out and you refused. I have stretched out my hand and no one regarded, because you disdained all my counsel and would have none of my rebuke. I will also laugh at your calamity. I will mock when your terror comes. When your terror comes like a storm and destruction comes like a whirlwind, when distress and anguish come upon you, then will they will call on me, but I will not answer. They will seek me diligently, but they will not find me, because they hated knowledge and did not choose the fear of the Lord. They will have none of my counsel, and despised my every rebuke. Therefore they shall eat the fruit of their own way, and be filled with the full of their own fancies. For the turning away of the simple will slay them, and the complacency of fools will destroy them. But whoever listens to me will dwell safely, and will be secure without fears of evil. Moving over to the ICB. Something to bear in mind: ICB is it is not a one-to-one translation, and what that means is the person who was translating it did not take every single word and try to find the perfect translation for it. What they did was they ended up taking what is called an essence translation. And what that means is the writer was trying to translate the essence of what the original words were trying to say, as opposed to a one-to-one translation. So it's something worth noting, because although it'll get very close to what the original significance of it was, it is not 100% what Solomon originally meant to say. It's a very good reference or point of reference to try to understand it, but it's definitely not the best translation in order for you to definitely say you're a theologian, for example. Definitely not good for scholarly things, but definitely amazing to help you on your road to having a better understanding of the Word of God. So, ICB, Book of Proverbs, chapter 1, verse 1, there are wise words of Solomon. Solomon was king of Israel. They teach wisdom and self-control. They give understanding. They will teach you how to be wise and self-controlled. They will teach you what is honest and fair and right. They give the ability to think to those with little knowledge. They give knowledge and good sense to the young man. Wise men should also listen to them and learn even more. Even they can find good advice in these words. Then they will be able to understand wise words and stories. They will understand the words of the wise and the riddles. Knowledge begins with respect for the Lord, but foolish people hate wisdom and discipline. Section break. It says, "My child, listen to your father's teachings and do not forget your mother's advice. Their teaching will beautify your life. It will be like flowers in your hair or a chain around your neck. My child, sinners will try to lead you into sin, but do not follow them. They might say, 'Come with us, let's ambush and kill someone. Let's attack some harmless person just for fun. Let us swallow them alive as death does. Let us swallow them whole as the grave does. We will take all kinds of valuable things. We will fill our houses with what we steal. Come join us, and we shall share with you what we steal. My child, do not go along with them. They do not do what they do. They run to do evil. They are quick to kill. It is useless to spread out a net right where the birds can see it. These men are setting up their own trap. They will only catch themselves. All greedy people will end up this way. Greed takes away the life of the greedy person. Wisdom is like a good woman who shouts in the street. She raises her voice in the city square. She cries out in the noisy street. She makes her speech at the city gates. You foolish people, how long will you want to stay foolish? How long will you make fun of wisdom? How long will you hate knowledge? Listen then when I correct you, I will tell you what's in my heart. I will tell you what I'm thinking. I called, but you refused to listen. I held out my hand, but you paid no attention. You did not follow my advice. You did not want me to correct you. So I will laugh when you are in trouble. I will make fun when the disaster happens to you. Disaster will come over you like a storm. Trouble will strike you like a whirlwind. Pain and trouble will overwhelm you. Then you will call out to me, but I will not answer. You will look for me, but you will not find me. You rejected knowledge, and you did not choose to respect the Lord. You did not accept my advice. You rejected my corrections, so you will get what you deserve. You will get what you planned for others. Fools wander away and get killed. They are destroyed because they do not care. But those who listen to me will live in safety. They will be safe without fear of being hurt. Okay. So, the book of Proverbs, chapter 1. Something worth noting. The book of Proverbs, of course, was written by the book of Solomon, and this was the time that Solomon was already famous. This is a moment where Solomon is actually realistically putting pen to paper, and his one true goal, to be honest with you, is being able to make volumes of a collection of sayings that he can pass on to his children, the future rulers of Israel, so that they may have wisdom, so that they might be able to rule effectively. And he kind of goes on to more or less kind of explain that in the first couple of verses 1 through 6. It says, Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel, to know wisdom and instruction, to perceive the words of understanding, to receive instruction of wisdom, justice, judgment, and equity, to give you prudence to the simple, to the young man knowledge and discretion. A wise man will hear and increase learning, and a man of understanding will attain wise counsel. To understand a proverb and enigma, the words of the wise and their riddles. In other words, King Solomon is simply laying out what the purpose of this book is. He is not in it for the fame or the glory. In other words, by this time, Solomon was so famous that he did not need any more fame. The reason why he wrote this book was not so that he could be on the New York Times bestseller list. The reason why he actually wrote this book is to make sure that his future generations would benefit from a knowledge that essentially was fleeting. Solomon's legacy might still stand even today, but Solomon is not here anymore. And that's something that Solomon understood, the concept that he was taking the time to have these words instruct future generations. He goes on to say the following. He says, to give prudence to the simple, and to the young man knowledge and discretion. In other words, the concept that Solomon was speaking at this point in time, or teaching, he was trying to let them understand that no one is born being wise. If anything, it's to give those who are simple, those who are not wise, the ability to be, to have prudence, to have wisdom, to have, to allow them to gain some form of knowledge. To the young man, knowledge and discretion. In other words, it is a way for him to actually go out and give knowledge and give the ability to the person who's reading the ability to obtain wisdom. And there is a word that he uses, which is the concept of discretion. In other words, knowledge can be interpreted as, something that something, information, if you will. But discretion, that word right there speaks more on actions. It speaks more on the way that we live our lives. It talks more about the concept of how we live our lives. There used to be a time when the internet did not exist. There used to be a time where communication was not as simple as it is today. There was a time where people had to have discretion. In other words, they had to know what it was that they were saying, to whom it was that they were saying it to understand that whatever they would write, whatever they would think, whatever they would say was going to be scrutinized by the public. It was going to be, they were going to be spoken about by the neighbors. That's something, unfortunately, that's kind of gone out the window with social media. Truly kind of crazy. I was born in 1989. I grew up in the 90s, so I got to see the very tail end of that, where you got to live a much simpler life. It's kind of crazy seeing how social media has kind of turned everything. What I mean by that is, back in the day, you wouldn't really say everything to everyone. You would reserve things to yourself. Now, with social media, you have people that just kind of go on social media and they put on blast everything that they're feeling, everything that they're thinking, and sometimes the fact of the matter is that's not a good thing to do, because he kind of goes on and he goes on to say in verse 5, a wise man will hear and increase his learning. In other words, wisdom is not something that's obtained by you speaking. Wisdom is not something that's obtained by you talking. Wisdom is something that, quite frankly, is obtained by listening. It is something that you obtain by being quiet. It is something that you obtain by humbling yourself and knowing that sometimes it's better to listen than it is to speak. It says that a wise man and a man of understanding will attain a wise counsel. Wise counsel. In other words, wise counsel would mean that there is counseling from a wise person, or he is surrounded by wise people. Something that is definitely worth noting here is the concept that there is kind of this play on a theme, which is the concept that people are born simple. People are born without wisdom. It's something that you have to obtain. And it goes as far as to say, you know what I mean, a man of understanding, or someone who really thinks about things, will do his absolute best to obtain wise counsel. In other words, as an example, we have Rehoboam, Solomon's son. The man literally had given unto him a kingdom that was very prosperous, that had seen its greatest growth that it had ever seen. But amazingly enough, this man was unable to actually receive the ability to reap all of its benefits, because even though he had access to his father's counsel, the counsel that counseled the most wise man on the face of the earth up to that point, this man decided to listen to his knucklehead friends over lunch, telling him how to run a country when none of them had ever run a country, telling him what none of them had ever been in his situation, and none of them had any kind of life experience. And it kind of goes to show that having the people that we have around us will ultimately affect who we are and what we do and how we do things. Unfortunately for Rehoboam, the kingdom broke in half because he heeded the wisdom of the people, or the advice of the people that were around him, which he thought were cool friends, instead of the actual wise counsel he had around them. And it kind of goes to kind of this really speaks loud volumes of something, and that is the concept of having wise counsel, or being surrounded by people that can give you counsel. The concept that we may be as simple can be. We can be as simple as literally a white piece of paper. In other words, we have no knowledge in us whatsoever, or on us. But the concept of seeking out counsel would literally take us to a whole different other place. And that honestly right there is, I think, something worth noting. And the reason why it's worth noting is because the question becomes, who is the person that is around us? Who is the person that is giving us counsel? Who is the person that quite literally and ultimately is there to guide our steps? And most of the time we run to people who we think have been down this walk of faith for many years. Many times we go to friends, many times we go to people who are teachers, and granted, they might all be good resources, but James in the book of James chapter 1 verse 5, he kind of lays it out simple for us. It says, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally and without reproach, and will be given to him. In other words, anybody who wishes to enter the counsel of God, all they have to do is quite literally go to God. And this is an interesting and a stark contrast, in the sense that if you kind of notice the counsel of men and everybody that's around, usually they're there for a reason. Usually they have a secondary motive. Usually there's a form of repayment that normally they will ask. But we should ask ourselves the following question: is there any counsel of wise men that is as wise as God? And more importantly, is there anyone who will give us wisdom with no secondary motive or need for repayment? Truly, the friendship with God, a real relationship with Him, The ability to receive his counsel will far surpass the wisdom of any counsel. In other words, when we have him as a father, when we have him as a friend, much like Abraham had him as a friend, when we have the ability to speak to him, God will be the one to counsel us. The Holy Spirit will be the ones to guide. Will be the one to guide us. The problem becomes when we don't have that intimacy with the Lord, when we don't look for him, when we take counsel from every other book on the face of this earth, and we choose not to read the Bible, and we choose not to dabble into the actual Word of God. Is it any surprise that we live the life that we live? Is it any surprise that we find ourselves in the presence of people who will, yes, maybe give us some form of knowledge, some form of wisdom, but they're expecting something in return? Truly, God does not ask for anything in return. Rather, much like Solomon was doing this for his children, the Lord does this for us. The concept of wanting us to be better off. He does it for our well-being. Verse 7, I think, is kind of self-explanatory. It says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. And truly, I mean, the question is, what's there left to say? I think everybody has heard this verse at least once in their life. Moreover, so I think that if we look at it through a wide lens, I think that yes, there is absolutely nothing else left to say, and we can just move on. But the problem becomes this: when we take it away from the wide lens, and we put it underneath a microscope or underneath a magnifying glass, something else happens. We find ourselves looking at the word fear, and we realize that fear in our society means to be afraid. It means terror. It means something where you are there, but it's you wish you would not be there, if anything, much like a horror film or something. What's interesting is the fact that that word fear is not what, as we have it today, is not what Solomon was trying to communicate. There are two names you're probably going to hear on this channel very often, and that is Bible commentator Matthew Henry and theologian Charles Haddon Spurgeon. And Matthew Henry describes it as a total surrender or a reverence, like the relationship between a father and a son. It is the constant search for his ways that lead to eternal life. Charles Haddon Spurgeon describes it as an affectionate reverence by which the child of God bends himself humbly, the earnest desire to please him, because although his wrath is bitter, his love is so sweet. In other words, it is the concept that the fear that Solomon is speaking about, it has nothing to do with being afraid, but rather it has everything to do with the concept that you choose to believe, rely, and depend on him wholeheartedly. It is the concept that you bend your own desires to his desire so that he may move forward. The concept of affectionate reverence by which the child of God bends himself humbly, the earnest desire to please him. That concept right there, the affectionate reverence, that word right there has so much implication. It's the concept that it's a reverence that we give over to someone because it is our way of showing affection. In other words, when we look at, like for example, marriage, to kind of drive a point home, Paul tells a woman, that she basically has to I believe the word uses is basically to obey. The concept of having to basically subject herself to her husband and allow the husband to be the head of the household. Contrastly over, it literally speaks about a husband giving himself over to the wife, loving her basically unconditionally the way that Jesus loved the church. And when we kind of go into those things, we kind of realize that both parties basically have to give their arm to twist. And what I mean by that is this: just as a woman has to essentially give respect over to her husband, the man has to be affectionate toward his wife, regardless of whatever the situations might arise. In other words, it is the husband's job to, much like the church basically failed the Lord Jesus Christ still loved the church. And even up to today, we see that the church continuously might fail the Lord maybe in minor things, but we still fail the Lord. And despite all of our shortcomings, He still loves us. Well, in that same way, that concept where there is an affection reverence, where they bend their own desires to make the other person happy. This is what Charles Spurgeon is speaking about. In affection, um, where we would rather have God be happy than ourselves be happy. In other words, the concept is, even though His wrath is bitter, we don't worry about His wrath, because our main concern is to make sure that we obtain His love, which is ever so sweet. Verses 8 through 9. Verses 8 through 9 read as follows. It says, "My son, hear the instruction of your father, and do not forsake the law of your mother, for they will be graceful ornament on your head and chains on about your neck." One thing that we definitely see on here is the concept of Solomon speaking about the concept that although, yes, there are wise counsels outside of the home, although there are places for us to gain wisdom outside of the home, we do see that he goes far enough to tell us that essentially wisdom or the fear of the Lord begins being instructed at home. It's something where a mother and a father will be the ones to pass on their morals and their value systems to their children. If anything, in Exodus 20:12, it kind of goes as far as to say, "Honor your father and mother, that your day may be long upon the land which the Lord your God is giving you." In other words, we can completely 100% go as far as to say that yes, there is there's wisdom in the counsel of wise men, and there's wisdom in your parents, but not all wisdom is the same. Unlike the wisdom of school or the knowledge that school gives you, unlike the wisdom that wise men can give you, there is a special kind of wisdom that comes from your mother and your father. And the way that he says that it is like an ornament for your head, or basically it is like chains that are around your neck. It literally it speaks less about wisdom and more so about the honor that kind of a wisdom brings you. In other words, the wisdom that your mother and your father gives you is wisdom that brings honor to you. Something that can't be stressed enough is that instruction does not start at school, at a university, or in the military. Instruction should begin at home. And although school can instruct scholastically, knowledge, value, and morality is taught at home and passed on generationally. If we kind of take a quick note, we see here Solomon. He kind of switches up the imagery of what he's saying, or he kind of goes and completely moves over to a different kind of wisdom, which is the wisdom of the wicked, the wisdom of the sinners. It shows on here that the sinners, it says, "My son, if sinners entice you, do not consent. If they say, 'Come with us, let us lie in wait to shed blood. Let us lurk secretly for the innocent without cause. Let us swallow them whole like Sheol, and whole like those who go down to the pit.'" If we kind of really take the time to notice exactly what it is saying, he's kind of going about, and he is kind of alluding to the concept that just like your parents, just like as wise men will try to counsel you, it does seem that temptation will come along as well. In other words, it goes as far as to say, "We shall find all kinds of precious possessions. We shall fill our houses with the spoil. Cast your lot among us, let us all have one purse." In other words, it is an invitation for fellowship, and many times it's something that many people don't speak about, but is the concept of what is the company that you keep. Who are the people that are around you? And if we kind of notice, Solomon is telling his son that if he keeps sinners around, eventually the sinners will entice him. In other words, there is something that Spurgeon said in his commentary through the book of Proverbs, and he said, "Consent will constitute sin." In other words, Eve's sin was not that she heard what the serpent was telling her. Eve's sin was the fact that Eve went and consented to what the snake told her to do. In other words, The truly terrifying thing about the matter is the fact that consent to a small sin will lead to a bigger sin. In other words, it wasn't enough for Eve to listen to the serpent and eat from the fruit. The next sin that she went was dragging her husband along down with her. In other words, David's original sin was not that he saw the woman bathing on the rooftop, because he could have continued walking. The problem was that he went and called after her, and after he consented to the sin, after he committed adultery with this man then continued to lie about it, trying to cover up. He committed murder and homicide after he committed adultery, and afterward he tried absolutely to fool God, or better yet said, fool the kingdom, because God can't be fooled, and he believed that nothing was going to happen. And when we kind of notice this entire situation go down, something that we have to take note is the fact that essentially one sin led to another sin, and one sin will continuously lead to a different sin every single time, to the point where we find ourselves next to these sinners, not just following along, not just sitting around a table and eating food with them, but to the point where we have taken their invitation to go out and to do evil things. It says eventually the invitation is no longer come with us. Eventually it is let us lie in wait to shed blood. Let us lurk secretly for the innocent without cause. Let us swallow them alive to the Sheol. And every single sin that they continuously say at that given point in time keeps getting worse and worse and worse. And the problem is that one step will lead you to another step. The next step will lead you to another step. Truly, this can be applied to the life of the believer. See, one thing that we don't realize is the fact of the matter is this. There are people sitting inside of a church that, although they say and claim to be believers, they're scornful people. And what I mean by that is the following. The Bible says in the book of Psalms chapter 1, blessed is the man that has not sat in the seat of scornful people, or in the seat of the scornful. In other words, the scornful are people who never have anything good to say about anyone, that do their absolute best to trash everyone around them. I'm sure everybody has met at least one person like that, that nothing good can ever happen in anybody else's life unless it's happening to me. Somebody gets a car, oh, well, why did they even get a new car? They don't even know how to drive. Then within 2 weeks, they're probably going to crash it. Oh, they bought a house. Oh, that house is ugly. They should have bought it in a better neighborhood. Oh, it's like he got married. Yeah, well, his wife is fat. Believe it or not, the concept of it is that concept that there are people who will do their absolute best to try to break other people down. The problem is that those scornful people, they invite you to sit in their chair, and most of the time, when we do not have the wisdom, we sit next to them, and eventually it's no longer just an invitation to sit down. It's no longer an invitation to just listen. Eventually it's an invitation for you to be as scornful as they are. And eventually what ends up happening is the scornful leave their chair, and at that given point in time, they leave their chair not to make amends with people, but rather they leave their chair to go and swallow the life of the righteous man. The problem is that there are many righteous people that have stumbled because of the scornful. A simple invitation can cause sin to reign in our life. Verse 15, Solomon is giving his son pretty solid advice, if you want me to be honest with you. The advice is, run. You don't need no shoes, no nothing. You just need to run. Joseph, when his master's wife tried to commit sexual immorality with him, Joseph ran. There was the Bible says that he left that room with his clothes in his hand. In other words, that moment when he ran, that was the moment that he made it clear that he was not consenting. Truly, consent will probably be the thing that most people will have an issue with, the concept of understanding that even that even as so much as sitting next to or being at the same table with a scornful person, with a sinner, eventually that friendship will eventually lead to something else. The relationship itself is not a sin, or better yet said, the friendship itself is not a sin, But what will come out of that friendship will more than likely lead you down a dark path should you be unable to pull them onto the right path. Truly, the question becomes: it's like what fellowship can light and darkness have? The issue at hand here is more so, what do you have in common with someone who does not hold your values? We look at chapter 16 through 19. It says, For their feet run to evil, and they make haste to shed blood. Surely in vain the net is spread in sight of any bird, but they lie in wait for their own blood. They lurk secretly for their own lives. So are the ways of everyone who is greedy for gain. It takes away the life of its owners. In other words, essentially Solomon is actually kind of taking a moment to analyze the heart or the contents of the sinner. When you kind of look at it, he is speaking about the concept that sinners, or better yet said, the wicked, the unjust, they will do everything and anything to get a better footing in life. We see this time and time again. You'll probably see it in your job, where there's someone who will literally throw everyone under the bus just so that they can get ahead in the company. You will find this essentially in people's lives that will scam people out of money just so they can make a quick buck. The fact of the matter is, Solomon is not only analyzing their heart, but he's taking a step forward, and that step forward will literally be the concept that he goes as far as to say their actions is like someone who lays a trap for a bird while the bird is noticing that there is a net being placed for his capture. In other words, no bird will ever fall in that trap, because eventually the trap itself will be out in the open. In other words, the life of these wicked people, eventually their fruits, they're seen, they're known. People will know who these people are, and they will not, I repeat, they will not, they will choose not to have a friendship with this person. They will always be seen as outcasts, because they know that that person is completely overrun by avarice. And most of the time, the people that these people hang out with will be the people that are exactly like themselves. People who lie in wait, trying to make others fall, but in reality, the only thing that gets spilled is their own blood, because their greed is the thing that causes their own demise. It goes on to say, from verse 20, we can kind of go on to 23, which is the concept of what it says, being 20 to 23. Wisdom calls aloud outside. She raises her voice in the open square. She cries out in the chief concourses, at the openings of the gate in the city. She speaks her words. How long, you simple ones, will you love simplicity? For scorners delight in their scorning, and fools hate knowledge. Turn at my rebuke. Surely I will pour out my love on you, or I will pour out my spirit on you. I will make my words known to you. In other words, Solomon is actually doing something that's really interesting, which is he's drawing us a picture. He is making wisdom out to be basically cognizant, basically a person that understands, that feels. And not only this, but he is giving them the ability to speak and actually say what's in their mind. And truly, wisdom has a very simple message, and that is the following. It is the concept of how long, you simple ones, will you love simplicity? For scorners delight in their scorning, and fools hate knowledge. In other words, knowledge calls out, and when she calls out trying to allow us to understand where our shortcomings are. And something that's worth noting is the fact that essentially James, in the book of James chapter 4 verse 17, says, therefore to him who knows to do good and does not do it, to him it is sin. In other words, the reason why people remain simple, the reason why people choose to be scornful, the reason why people choose to hate wisdom, is because they understand that while we can see the image that Solomon is saying, there is one truth that is extreme. It's an extremely bitter pill to swallow, and that is that the reason why we choose not to heed wisdom's calling is because we enjoy the sin that we live in. We enjoy the life that we're living. We choose to live. We choose to live a life of sin, not because it's forced upon us, because it's something like James previously mentioned in chapter 1. Basically, if anybody is in need of wisdom, just ask the Lord for it. Basically, allow wisdom when she knocks at the door to open. Allow yourself to open the door to her. Essentially, this is the moment where it's simply stated, we slam the door on wisdom's face. In fact, it goes as far as to say as to the fact that it searches for us everywhere. It searches for us up in the open squares. The open squares, I mean, back in the day was a place of gathering of dense population. We don't really have that anymore. Basically, with the internet and the way that our cities have evolved over time, we don't really have open squares, but essentially it would be a place where people would gather and share ideas, and they would just go to talk. And essentially, since we don't have that anymore, you can kind of think about how wisdom is basically found everywhere around you. You could find it literally in the street preacher that's out and about. You could find it in a preaching on YouTube, but yet instead of heeding to the wisdom, we would much rather be entertained. We would much rather be basically wrapped around our own devices and all the and all of the details that come with that. It goes on to say in verse 24 to 33, we're at the home stretch now. It says as follows. It says, "Because I have called and you refused, and I have stretched out my hand and no one regarded, because you disdained all of my counsel and would have none of my rebuke, I also will laugh at your calamity. I will mock when your terror comes. When your terror comes like a storm, and your destruction comes like a whirlwind, when distress and anguish come upon you, then they will call on me, but I will not answer. They will seek me diligently, but they will not find me, because they hated knowledge and did not choose the fear of the Lord. They have none of my counsel and despised every rebuke. Therefore they shall eat the fruit of their own way, and be filled to the full of their fancies, and turning away of the simple will slay them, and the complacency of fools will destroy them. But whoever listens to me will dwell safely, and will be secure without fear of evil." So, essentially, Solomon, instead of ending the first chapter explaining what his thoughts on the entire thing are, he continues to drive home the point of the image that he decided to draw for us, which is the concept that wisdom essentially is a person, that wisdom is something that's cognizant and has understanding and has feeling. Essentially, it goes on to explain that the day will come where wisdom will visit our lives, not in the time when we're young, but rather in the time where we've already basically started seeing the fallout of our life. And essentially, what ends up happening is, in this fallout, in this problem, in this situation, that right there is the moment where things begin to be problematic. Because when people start realizing how bad their life is, that is the time that usually people try to make a run for it, to try to change their life. After they begin asking, what happened with my life? How did I end up this way? Why is the situation the way that it is? Well, the problem becomes this. The problem ends up becoming the simple fact that we chose that life. The fact of the matter is, we chose to ignore wisdom when it was given unto us. We chose to not listen to its heed, its call, its beck, its cry when it was doing it. We chose to many times to live the way that we lived. In fact, it's safe to say that wisdom is not something that happens. What's the word I'm looking for? It's not something that happens or that you obtain after you've lived life and you've like literally made 1,000 mistakes. No, that's called life experience. Wisdom is something that's obtained when you've been instructed. Wisdom is something that you obtain through being counseled. It's something that you obtain when it is given unto you and you have not lived that life. And essentially, what ends up happening is wisdom, it finds itself in a position where it knows that yes, you can technically run to her now, but essentially your life is what it is, and nothing can change it at that given point in time, because we eat the fruits which we decide to reap. And Isaiah 55, 6-8, it says, "Seek the Lord while he may be found. Call upon him while he is near." There is a time and a place where the Lord allows us to look for him, to be able to set the base and the foundations to a better life. But when we choose to ignore those comments, when we choose to ignore that advice, that is the problem, where essentially the time comes where he probably will not be found. In fact, there is a time where it is too late. And it isn't because wisdom is not effective, but rather because we chose to eat the fruits of our ignorant labor. We chose to not fear the Lord. Therefore, it shouldn't be a surprise when we find ourselves mid-sea without any land in sight. In other words, the time will come when sin will drag you so deep into itself that you will find yourself in the middle of this vast sea known as sin, without the mercy of God anywhere near in sight, without you feeling like you can run back to the Lord. And although the fact of the matter is that all you need to do is cry out to him for him to send you a life vest so you don't drown in that sin in that sea of sin, the fact of the matter is that eventually the problem will become that the further in we go into our lives ignoring wisdom and allowing sin and ignorance to drag us into it, we stray farther and farther away from wisdom and from God. If honesty is the law which we abide by in life, then it would be easy to understand and accept that many times we eat bitter fruit because we choose not to surrender to God. We choose to ignore wisdom as she calls out onto us. In other words, when Solomon says the concept of the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, the concept that if we choose to surrender to God, if we choose to allow him to run our lives, if we choose to depend on him, the fruit that we gain from that is sweet. But the fruit that we gain from our own labors eventually becomes bitter, because although it is pleasant upon the initial tasting of that fruit, eventually that taste becomes bitter. And that's something that Solomon does end up speaking on later on in this book, which of course we will get into as time goes by. Meanwhile, though, I do want to thank you for joining us this Saturday, midday now at this given point in time. I don't know. I will ask my studio person if there is any questions up on the board. But if there are no questions up on the board, then we will simply say goodbye for today. Bear in mind that you are always able to leave a comment on the actual video, and I will get to it in a written form response as soon as I can. But of course, if you always have one during the live stream, you're more than welcome to leave it. And at the end of every single live stream, we will definitely answer those questions as best as we can. But meanwhile, I do want to thank you for tuning in today, and I will remind you that next Saturday we will be starting at 9 o'clock sharp, and hopefully this time without any kind of technical difficulties. That being said, again, do want to thank you for joining us, and remember, everything we have, everything we are, everything that God has allowed us to be is literally because of the grace of God. I will catch you around later, guys. Have a good one.